Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Data Specialist Office Hours. We are here to just have a chance to discuss data and all of the fun that goes along with that. We actually do have a guest speaker today. Heidi Behnke is here to talk to us a little bit about a project management support group that we're getting started. So I'm going to turn it over to Heidi and let her tell you a little bit about what we're doing there. And then we're going to move into kind of an open forum discussion. So Heidi?
Hi. As Shelley said, my name is Heidi Behnke. I am with Georgia Legal Services Program. I have been here for 11 years now, and I work currently as the statewide project manager. I have noticed I haven't always been a project manager formally with Georgia Legal, but I have always had a lot of the basic skill sets that project managers use. And as I have formally grown more into a role that has project management as its main component, I have noticed more and more project management principles and project managers coming out of the woodwork within other legal aid organizations, especially at ITC and EJC conferences. We've kind of started meeting up. But it's not really a formal thing, it is budding. And by we, I mean Shelley, LSNTAP, and me, because it's a pet project of mine, are very interested in creating a space for project managers to communicate, to try and share ideas, somewhat like LSNTAP does, but project management is so much more than when just the technology component. So it is going to be distinct from LSNTAP. And we're very open to trying to foster the different um, different processes or different elements of project management, whether it's communication, stakeholder management, trying to work with technology. Project management is a lot of technology in some regard. Um, but yeah, we want to make sure we have a place where you can find templates, communicate with each other, ask for ideas, see if somebody has an opinion on something or if they've gone through something different. Um, and I think that's the best overview. Shelley, am I forgetting anything about what we're kind of trying to work on?
Well, I think what we want to do is kind of what Susan has done with this group is bringing in the people who are doing project management on a daily basis. And in some case, we're going to see some overlap in these groups. In other cases, it may be other people within your organization. So we would love for you to share the information with your organization. And just so you know, our first meeting will be on August 13th. But that is followed by a webinar on next week on July 16th called Project Management Skills. So that may be of interest to you as you work with data because you do have projects that you're having to manage. So we wanted your community, the data community, to be aware of what's going on. So hopefully it will be of benefit. So thank you, Heidi.
I do want to add that we are building this from a mindset of formal project management has not been really introduced and it hasn't really taken hold in a lot of legal aid organizations. We are tailoring this to people who really don't know where they're starting, and people who are formal with it and people who have experience, they will find benefit from this. There will be resources available. But if you think you need more information about project management, or if you're just curious about it, this will be a good way to have baby steps into it.
Awesome. And I see your hand, Susan.
I think you may have just answered my question, but it was going to be, who do you expect to be kind of the target audience or participants? Is it, 'cause I know like from my work at LAFLA, obviously folks that are in grants often are doing project management type work, folks that are doing special projects or partnerships. And so are all of those folks kind of your target audience, or are you thinking more of folks that are doing this as their kind of named full-time job?
Yeah, we're looking at people who are not named. We want the people who are named to be coming in and helping support it, especially in coming up with things to talk about, and providing some of the initial documentation. But what I have found in communicating with others about project management, there's very few of us that actually have the title. I could probably count on one hand the number of people I've met. That doesn't mean that there's only that many, but most of the time, what I see in the legal aid community is a managing attorney who has also now been put in charge of a project, or a senior staff attorney, or somebody else And when it comes to grant writing, they are listed as the project manager, but it is nowhere in their title, and they have no training. They're given no support in what that actually means. They're just told you're in charge.
Isn't no training and no support the basis of how most legal aid organizations work?
I mean, you could say that about most nonprofits in general, but yes, it is. It is, and that's one of the reasons I'm very passionate about trying to create something like this. And it just happened to overlap with, I think, Shelley's goals of trying to expand this little new niche area. So hopefully this will be helpful for a lot of people. Are there other questions?
No, just thank you for doing this. I know it's a huge need and obviously overlaps quite a bit with, data and metrics. So I imagine this would be really useful, and I can, think of this also being a really great career path for folks who might be coming up as paralegals or non-attorneys who can still do amazing work. So thank you for it.
That is actually a really good point. I am a non-attorney, legal professional. I don't know what we want to call ourselves right now, but I have a master's degree in anthropology, and sometimes in legal aid organizations, not everyone, but in decent number of them, you find people who just give a lot of work to the attorneys, and they're treated like the end all be all for that. And I think having opportunities for legal professionals that are outside of that work really helps organizations grow in ways they never thought of before.
Absolutely. Well, super. So I want to give Susan, Vincent, do you have anything that you wanted to bring up today before? I mean, we don't have a formal topic, so before I open it to an open forum discussion, I wanted to check in with you.
No, thank you. I know that we kind of left off last time talking about data request tracking systems, and had started to go into a conversation about how to kind of cultivate that data curiosity at your organization while also not overloading you as the data person. So if there's no other topics, I'm happy to facilitate that, but I want to prioritize anything that the community is coming with.
I have a question for Heidi. Do you have any, like, so people can get like their base level on what you mean? Do you have any basic resources you'd point people to? So like, okay, I think I know what project management is, but let me confirm I actually have the same concept in my head that you're looking at.
Yeah, so PMI, Project Management Institute, it's the formal certification company that oversees a lot of stuff. I am a formally certified project management professional, PMP, but they have a lot of resources. If you become a member, you get access to even more. It's not that expensive, especially if you look at like CLE credits and whatnot. But you can be a member without having the certification. You can become a certified associate project manager. It's CAPM, which is the smaller version of the PMP. You become the PMP, but they have articles, videos, definitions just basically on their website. And let me go ahead and put the chat. I mean, it's fairly simple. Org. And I think that's a good way if you're just trying to get definitions and basic information on project management. It'll point you in a lot of directions. I can have like an entire hour-long presentation about what that involves, but that's where I would go if you just want to explore and find a lot of data.
So there's many people view case management as project management for attorneys.
Right.
Managing a load of cases is project management. A project can be really whatever you want it to be. If you are having to juggle schedules and tasks and other things along with it, that's project management in its very basic form. So, but yes, we will be developing other tools and other things, and we're starting with that webinar that will talk about the skills, and then we will continue creating a curriculum that will continue to provide, just as we're doing with data over the next 2 years. We have this data curriculum that we are developing and we'll be rolling out. Ashley, I saw your hand go up and then it's back down, but I wanted to make sure that your question did get answered.
No, I think I was doing a thumbs up, but thank you.
Oh, okay. I apologize. All right. Well,
Um,
we're opening the
so
floor to, go ahead, David.
I was just going to know, it's more of a sort of plug, I suppose, than a question, but so what our current TIG project is to work with Legal Server to try to develop a project management module to add into Legal Server to provide some better capabilities in that area. Um, it's still very much in an early development level. And obviously there's no promises on ultimately what turns out, what it turns out to be or what capacities are contained within it, but that's another area, I suppose, where people may see some new tools, uh, like late 2025. Um, or I don't know when Legal Server may decide to launch them more openly to everyone. I assume there will be some beta period even following the TIG development period, which runs through September 2025. Uh, but that's sort of in the pipeline.
Awesome.
And I went to David's presentation at ITC. I think it was at ITC or EJC.
ITC.
Yeah, at ITC. It is fascinating, all the stuff they're trying to add in. I'm really looking forward to that.
Leaving dead air so people can jump in if they have a topic that they want to discuss. All right, Susan, if you want to continue your discussion, I'm hoping that other people will jump in with other topics as they come up. But
I actually had a question because unfortunately every other meeting you guys have this, it manages to be exactly when I have to pick my kid up at school. So I'm probably sitting I don't know if in a little different place than most folks here, because I'm actually a funder who takes grant. Yeah, I take money from from some state agencies, then pass it on to, and then we pass it through to the entities we fund. I'm thinking a lot about data as, what are the people that are putting requirements on me saying I have to get, and what am I telling my people that I'm working with they have to give me? But it's a small organization. It's been around for a while. It's Pennsylvania Legal Aid Network. I often have trouble with. I'm trying to use a database to essentially track the data as this is a requirement of X contract, and this is we get this database because this piece of data because this contract requires it. This contract requires it, and we use it in reporting to this funder and this funder. And this is why, because I'm always worried, because I used to work for a legal aid organization, that I felt like a lot of the stuff we were asked was just asked over and over again because people didn't know to turn the spigot off because nobody was using that. And I was wondering if anybody has done this kind of thing in a database, trying to track you ask for this characteristic about a client or this thing from a client, and trying to track that piece of data from the contract to where it hits in the system, so you know where you're grabbing it from, trying to pull all that information together.
I haven't done it on a large scale, but I have done it for our pro bono program. We have lots of questions that come about for the grantee report for LSC, and then we have the malpractice insurance reports and all of that. And then we have the fact that there's just stuff that's plain interesting that people have tried to track in the past and then doesn't really connect to anything. Mm-hmm. And we took all of the different pieces together, and then we tried to consolidate them into reports. And then we took that and turned it into a single Excel report that we get to check quarterly to make sure that we're still in compliance with it. The process of having those conversations and deciding, is this a metric that's worth keeping, or metric that's contributing to our ability to meet our other goals, it was really interesting. And I think it was really helpful for the team because it was the first time we'd had those conversations. What specifically about that process is it that you want to see more of that process, or?
I'm trying to come up with the best tool to do it. We've, like a lot of places, we're a Microsoft shop. So, we've got legal server, and then we've got a whole bunch of Microsoft tools that we probably underutilize. And, a lot, Excel ties a lot of things together because a lot of people push things out into Excel. If it can't talk anything else, you hit Excel. But Excel has its limits. You end up setting up like a faux database in Excel that unless you're really, really slick with with functions and or even or some of the other programming you can do in it, you're still doing some cutting and pasting, or going from sheet to sheet, where it feels like a lot of this tracking would be better in a dedicated database.
Yeah.
Of if you're getting really complex about it, because you suddenly realize that you've got a contract requirement on. We have a contract that's like has content going out 500 plus pages, and occasionally sticks a contract requirement here and there. So you want to track where that came from in that big thing, and what pieces of data you're getting. And it's probably the data that comes out of the legal server. We're getting most of it through legal server or from an Excel spreadsheet somebody sends us. And I kind of want to track each one of those spots that it's hitting, and then also say, this version of the contract has it. Well, we just signed a new version of the contract. Go through and check real quick to make sure they're still requiring that. So I'm trying to get that all together, and it's just because we don't have a lot of staff. I'm trying to track all that stuff. So I've actually been fooling around with, because it's relatively easy to do. I'm just fooling around with an Access database to do that. But now it's been 25 years since I took a course on how to do Access database based design.
Eric,
so yeah.
Do you think that maybe training ChatGPT on your contracts, like the premium edition, and maybe a data dictionary would work?
I'd never really thought about it. My concern about ChatGPT is I'm always worried I guess I don't understand them completely, so I'm worried I'll miss something on the ins and the outs. Like I can ask it to look. It's just not a skill set. It's not a skill set I've developed yet. So,
Susan, you had some thoughts?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, so a couple of thoughts, and this is again coming from the legal services provider side. One thing that we try to do is be very intentional when we're creating the fields in legal server about a couple different things. One, naming conventions, of kind of identifying why that field is being entered, and putting like a prefix or a suffix on there to where we can identify, this field is for this thing. The second way that we identify that is putting stuff in the actual description of the field, and or where we're putting it in legal server. So if it's going on the intake, that's typically going to be restricted to our stuff. We have to ask everything, not exclusively, but usually. And then our grant specific stuff is on grant specific forms. And so then when those grants are wound down, we can go through and deactivate those and again add notes and whatever. Legal server also allows you to make reports on fields. And so we can actually run a report and say, give me all the fields with X and the prefix, etc. So internally, that's a lot of what we're doing. I have worked with our grants team to kind of create an outline of like, okay, which fields are actually going into which report for the grant. And so, we'll have, a wind down meeting or a renewal meeting or what have you to talk about like what's changed. I know on their end, they'll do honestly just like a kind of like document comparison. If it's otherwise similar, that doesn't always work, but if it's otherwise similar, doing a document comparison can help identify that. And we do have a data dictionary, a very small one, but we've had a little bit of trouble figuring out how to make best use of that. My kind of personal rule is if I'm going to spend more time creating documentation than anyone is ever going to spend reading it or save by reading it, then it may not be a good use of time. And so trying to figure out how much time to invest in that to make it as comprehensive as it would need to be useful, without just, spending all my time on that and not doing kind of the day-to-day work that I otherwise have to do. So I don't have a great answer. Our data dictionary is in lists, and we found that really useful. You can do cross-referencing in Microsoft lists. So For example, you can take, we've got our grants management on SharePoint. So we've got a list of grants, and you can actually cross-reference and tag like, okay, this data point goes with this grant, this grant, and this grant. And so it's like a very lightweight database. But that's what we've done so far. It's not perfect, but so far it's we haven't gotten into any huge hot water, knock on wood, for not knowing where things were.
I hadn't thought about, I've seen the lists there, but I hadn't really thought about playing with them in that context. That's an interesting idea.
So just so I know we had a question in the chat about what is a data dictionary, and we've had some good answers come through the chat. And I want you to know that that is one thing that we have been looking at is perhaps providing a template. And we've reached out to Margaret Hagan because this is a project that she has been working on with naming conventions and that kind of things for fields. So we want to make sure that we're working with as many organizations as possible so that naming of fields, because there is a whole movement on standardization of fields within databases so that when one organization says this is what this represents, another organization, their data agrees. And that is a complete non-data person's explanation of that. However, I have found that even within the same organization, what one office is putting in a field is not necessarily the same as what another office is putting within a field. So creating those data dictionaries and the data glossaries can be very helpful to have a conversation within your own organization of what is supposed to go in those fields and identifying what should be there versus what necessarily might be there. So that's definitely a conversation that we can have and maybe bring a topic on that, a talk on that in the future, in a future session.
I would love to see a conversation about how to get your staff to actually follow the naming convention. Because we've talked about that one before. And yeah, you say it, you present it, they all agree, and then you go back and everybody does the exact same. That was my next training question. Yeah.
Awesome.
I don't think I've ever tried even to enforce a naming convention with more than 5 people. 3 is usually about the limit. 5 is the max for me.
We try to rely pretty heavily on pick lists so that it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. But as those of us that are lawyers and work with lawyers know, lawyers do not like having to select from a predisposed number of, they want to put an entire story in it. Our entire staff would have every field would be just an open text box with 100,000 characters in it. So it's that struggle between like what works for people and what works for gathering actual usable data.
Well, and then searching the past stuff, because there's no way you're going to rename everything from the past.
Yep.
Yes, new case management systems are a great time to have that bright line of when things change.
Oh, yep.
We've also had issues where we decided on a naming convention, like when we created maybe 20 fields specifically for a grant. And that stuff, that data worked really well. So then people want to continue to gather that data, but the field is named after a certain grant. And then people have a hard time building reports if you don't change the name and if you do change the name. So scalability sometimes with that can be really difficult when you pick specific names for grants versus the incredible amount of time it takes to make the data dictionary with more general names. So it's not easy.
Yeah, I think my workaround for that has been if we decide to keep tracking it, I'll create a brand new field, I'll also use that as an opportunity to revise it if I, decide it should be a Boolean instead of a dropdown, et cetera. And then I'll run some kind of browser automation to copy the data from the prior field to the new one and leave the prior field there. So we know that was for the grant. We know that's why we did it. And then we have a new one that we're using moving forward that folks can more easily reference, and it's more generic. And then at that point, it might get put in the general data dictionary. It does require, again, like that administrative work on my end of getting the data from one place to another. But it's easier for me to do than it is to get anyone else to do it. So
this is kind of where I've kind of hit is like, I feel like a lot of times I'm making, I'm building, and this might be obvious to somebody who does this all the time, and I'm building a database about my data, label, the to the extent I can label that field, or like in the way, attach all that data about that I need to know about that field for the future, so that like the naming doesn't matter as much as what I particularly named it, because I know from the context, oh, I used it for this contract, but I can add the extra data here on that field about the information there to recontextualize that in another situation. And I'm just, this isn't my background, so I kind of get lost in the data structure, like kind of recursion back. Like I put this field up that collects, a couple of data points, a couple of possible selections about a client, but I want to know attached to that it's from this contract. But I also want to attach to that we used it for this report, and then it's like everybody else, I'm working with at least partially in legal server, and I can't quite get there with legal server. So trying to think of a way to tie what I'm doing out of legal server into something else, because that the legal server is my main source of data, source for the information, but tie all that metadata in onto it. And I'm just, I've come up with a couple different ways, and they all seem to fall apart.
yeah, that's
I
where it's
do.
like,
Oh, I'm sorry. I think, and this is just kind of parallel to what we're talking about here. I do think adding into the descriptions or having the component of why we need it is really important in getting people to adopt the data gathering, because what I have found when we've tried to do larger scale data collection projects is that the staff are very resistant to it, because if it doesn't seem completely tied to the legal services that they're providing or the legal advice, to them it feels like we're just harvesting our clients for information for reasons that we don't understand. And so I do think like there's a lot of resistance to gathering more data and referring to our clients as data and parts of their life as data. So I do think maybe even adding in the description of each field that the staff can see, like what grant it ties into or why we're gathering it, could be helpful in project adoption.
So I would agree with the fact that the information needs to be available, but what I found is our staff, the more we provide that information and make it explicit, the less they care about it. So like, I think if somebody has a question, being able to say it, I definitely don't think we should be referring to the clients as data. But I also think one way to get around it is to do smaller scale projects where they can see the improvements to their services, or something where they can quickly turn around and see the success of the project, will help them understand, okay, and then when you do larger scale things, they'll be more open to it. But yeah, I do think the more data I get and the more math centric I get, the less that people tune out faster.
That's interesting.
yeah, I mean, I think that's something we think about a lot with our clients and our staff as well, as being like, okay, we want to close the loop, right? If like we're asking them to put the data in, we want to show them the outcome, like what are we doing with that data? And if we're not doing anything with it, should we really be collecting it? But I think that, like you said, folks, just want that basic reassurance that yes, someone is thinking about this, and then they kind of tune out. They don't necessarily need or want all the kind of nuts and bolts about it. But kind of going back to Eric's kind of question, I think that there's, you know, a people, process, and technology aspect to this, right? Of like, what's the best technology to do the data dictionary and track the data? There's the people side of like, what do people need to know and what training do you need? But I think that the process piece is actually where a lot of opportunity lies. And kind of Heidi, to your point of project management, right? It's all about like having defined processes, right? And so one of the things we're trying to improve is specifically our grants, like onboarding and offboarding processes. And so thinking about, you know, an offboarding process for grants of like, okay, part of what happens when a grant winds down is we go back and we look at the legal server report, we look at all the fields in there, we figure out like, you know, do we need to disable these or remove these or, you know, rename them, do whatever we need to do. And that's not new technology. It's just, you know, a new process step that's been really useful. Again, not perfect and we're not implementing it perfectly yet, but that's what we're working on.
I think there's also a maybe this is a different topic, or maybe it's just, I don't know, overlapping, but there's a translate. I feel like most of my job is translation, taking the project and the process, like that's where I shine, and then trying to make sure that people understand it. And it's technology definitely experiences that too, because I think a lot of IT departments tend to be on their own, and then the staff are separate, and then they try and mesh together when they have some kind of issue. But being able to explain what's going on in a way that gives the staff information in a way that they actually can hear it it's a challenge. But yeah, I feel like translation could be its own session that we have here.
I feel like that even goes into kind of the conversation that we were having last time about how do you develop that kind of culture of curiosity, because one of the things that they've, you know, pretty well studied in adult learning is that if you're not already asking the question, you're not going to retain the answer. So if I just give you information and you weren't needing it, you didn't know that you needed it, then it's going to go in one ear and out the other. But if you yourself have identified, like, I need this information, I have this question, then whatever you're training on or teaching or communicating is actually going to stick. And so that's, you know, a huge issue that I just think it takes a lot of time is how do you help folks to ask those questions and to even know to ask those questions. Eric, I feel like we took your question and ran with it, but hopefully at least got to a little bit of an answer.
This has been very, very helpful because it's helped me articulate some of the what I'm running into. Like I'm doing this mostly on my own with some asking people why, you know, why do we have this field, or why do we ask this in that way, and then trying to see, you know, what I can do in legal server or what I can do in other places. This has been helpful to kind of refine how I refine how I think about it. Thank you.
And also, I want to address something else you brought up, Eric, is our meeting times. So we have been in discussions that there have been some conflicts with this time that we're currently holding. So we have been discussing moving back to the original time that Susan's group had initially been meeting. So we would love to hear feedback on days and times where this meeting would be better for you. So we are open to those suggestions. And we would do that, I believe, at the beginning of the year, you know, continue on through the end of the year at this time, but then move it so that it's more accessible if we're finding that that is a better time. All right.
I'm not sure I don't want things to be too complicated, I suppose, but I was thinking having it not necessarily always be on the same date and time, because people, like, it may be hard, like people will just have different difficulties at different points. And if the meeting is only on Mondays at noon, like that could universally eliminate one person but accommodate another.
Good suggestion. All right. Well, if anyone doesn't have any suggestions, I know that Susan would be happy to talk about continue the discussion from last time, but we want to be open for other questions as well.
Honestly,
So-
can I ask a random question? Because I know there's a bunch of legal server admins in this room. Is anyone else getting weird behavior from branch logic blocks on multi-select fields right now? I swear it just started and they just don't work anymore. Or is it just my site and I need to do a ticket? Probably need to do a ticket either way.
No one has mentioned it to me today.
Okay. I'll send Ron an email. Well, support.
I mean, if it started since like Thursday or Friday, then it's probably something they broke.
That's my
tend
guess,
to
but
break
there's
things.
nothing in the release notes about branch logic getting messed with, so yeah.
They don't like to tell you until it's done.
They hope they snuck it through without any issues. All right, Susan, sounds like you may be free to go ahead and continue that discussion.
So, well, if anyone has anything else, feel free to jump in while I pull up that document we left off on. I will just go ahead and share, in case it's of interest to folks. And I've got some stuff to add to it now that based on this conversation. But oh, Shelly, it looks like I'm not able to share my screen. We do have a data dictionary for LAFLA that we've started to build out, and one of the things that I'll probably add following today's conversation is that kind of use case of like, is this specific to a grant or not? But we've built it out in Microsoft Lists, and so it's pretty basic. Doesn't require database skills to access or to enter. And so we've got kind of what is the general name for the kind of piece of data? What might you be looking for? What is it? How do you use it? Where do you get it? Has some category. Where do you collect it? And for how many cases do you collect it? And so this is where you would kind of say like at what stage of the cases is it collected, and or is it collected for a specific grant? But then I think I will add that kind of next column of like who asked for it, and kind of the reason for collecting it. And we started building this out because every year we do an annual report, and every year I get asked for a number that doesn't exist or that doesn't map exactly on something that we're tracking. And so trying to better communicate this to folks is something we want to do. The other nice thing about having it in lists is that I can then pull this into Power BI and kind of cross-reference with legal server if I wanted to. So I can like say, okay, this is actually all of these fields are this type of thing or in this category, and pull in, the description and the kind of additional information. We also originally had in like where is it collected, like a screenshot of kind of where is that data being collected, so you can kind of see it. But again, that was something that I was doing kind of on my own initiative without knowing that anyone was reading it, and so stopped doing that for now until I got the scope of this really built out. But that's what we were thinking. So I'm really curious, Shelly, like as we're continuing to work with Margaret and others to figure out best practices, I'm sure we will continue revising that. Yeah, so how did I start that list? I started it from our annual report. So from stuff that I was getting asked regularly, what kinds of fields am I getting asked about? What stuff is most commonly misunderstood? Or what am I getting asked for that's kind of out of scope, right? And so I'll be asked for like level of service, which we get from closing code for cases that were just opened, right? And we hadn't set in any kind of protocol for entering that prior to case closing. And so kind of putting a structure in place to answer those questions was what really drove this. We also did a presentation on kind of data and how to understand case data at a recent NL88 conference. So if there's any interested in that PowerPoint, I'm happy to upload it. but basically it's trying to communicate to non-data folks, so to your program managers, to your communication staff, et cetera. You know, what is the basics of data management and how does that interact with the life cycle of a case, in order to help them ask better questions, right? And like, and understand what might be possible and what might not be possible. Okay, so I'll drop that in the chat. If I can, let me see if I can get to. There we go. Okay, so that's uploading. Yeah, looks like we've got a great idea for just the server, using field trip to kind of export the fields. Legal server, you could do something similar, either going into the admin side of things and exporting directly to the list view, or running a report based on first kind of new reports, then metadata as the category, and then under that fields, you can export that. Let me actually pull this up, and I'm curious to see if any of y'all have thoughts about this, since you got on the subject of kind of case data. So this is a presentation that I did an NLIDA with a couple of folks from Texas, and it was kind of last minute, so it's a little bit of a a kind of cobbled together presentation, but folks seem to find it useful, and I'm curious what you guys would kind of add or change, because I imagine that this might be something useful to do other places as well. So basically, we talk to folks about kind of the data lifecycle, the case lifecycle, and then what you can do with that data once you have a good understanding of kind of where it's coming from. And so we kind of walk folks through just the data lifecycle of, you know, to collect data, then you have to put it in somewhere, then you have to review and clean it, then you can extract and visualize it, and then you can actually, you know, analyze and use it. And so kind of trying to communicate to advocacy leaders that just because you ask someone a question does not mean that you have their answer in a reusable format, and that it has to kind of go through all these steps in order to be, you know, useful. And then tying that into something that this particular audience was much more familiar with, which is the case lifecycle, saying, okay, like most of your kind of demographic client specific data is going to be collected at intake or at screening, not all of it, but a good percentage of it. And then you're going to get a little bit more information at the kind of assignment and opening process, you know, stage of the case. Then you're going to get a lot more kind of small pieces of information during the life of the case itself, but it's a lot less structured. And so that's really tricky to get interim data without clear processes. And then at case closings, where you get the information about the legal services. So you get the client information earlier on, the legal services information much later. And then again, kind of traditionally, the data management has been at the end of the case, where we kind of look at everything and get it together. But increasingly, that kind of data lifecycle is getting pushed earlier and earlier into the case as we're needing to report on open cases and, you know, use that data for more things besides reporting. And so that's kind of what we talked about next, was kind of what can you do with the data once you've identified the data points. So I guess my reason for bringing this up, my question to you all is, have you tried to kind of give any kind of internal presentation like this to help your managers, your grant staff, your kind of MA staff understand the data lifecycle, or what else have you done to kind of encourage folks to think in a more informed way about the data that you have and what they can do with it?
I don't I don't think we've really done presentation in the context of presenting these topics as like a data life cycle or data management sort of approach. but I mean, I have made presentations about sort of how we get information, how we use it, ways to, if you need new things done, like these are the things to think about, and trying to provide training on or at least easy reference tools for what things mean that already exist. So not necessarily, not entirely like a for the data dictionary, but it's similar, I suppose, but related both to like this process has this information and you know this happens at this point. So if you need to get more information, you can think about where it fits into your current workflow. And I said there's also, we at least structure that there's a fair amount of structured forms that advocates may complete while doing a case because certain things just aren't known at intake. And so we expect advocates to know, oh, I need to go complete this form now. Generally, it's at more of the beginning of their representation, but others are like the closing process has an extra form if you're handling a foreclosure case right now, for example. So it's I guess more focused on presenting it as how it sort of impacts them directly than as like a data management in and of itself.
I've got a follow-up for David, then I see Randall, you've got next. So David, are you typically having that kind of at the beginning of like a new grant or a new situation where folks are trying to collect a piece of data, or is that a more general conversation that you've had at management meetings or some?
I would say primarily it's been driven by changing grant requirements or new grant requirements. I mean, I think our management team is generally like they're sympathetic to data needs broadly. But so far there's not a lot of like just data discussion for the purpose of data management, sort of explaining that life cycle and stuff.
I know.
So Randall had his hand up a moment ago. Did your question get answered, Randall, or is there anything else? I want to make sure we give you the opportunity before we move on to Ashley.
No, I just wanted to comment. One thing I found that's been helpful in terms of making data more understandable. We have a tough time with our grant staff really grasping legal server reports. They just do not translate very well. And the grant staff just kind of goes in there and they don't exactly know what to do. So we've been bringing things over to Power BI. We recently started our intake census for the Cal Bar. We have another grant that we report on in a collection tool format that's a locked tool. And so we've been kind of taking our data out of legal server, sending it over to Power BI via API, and then reforming the data in a format that they can see and say, okay, this is how the funder is asking for that data. Now I understand it, because we tried for years really doing training on legal server reports, and it's just something that they just never really picked up on. But Power BI makes it very easy. The filtering is more user-friendly than trying to do and/or configurations on the back end of a report in legal server. So for us, that's been a great answer for making it more understandable for the layperson. The average manager doesn't need to learn how to use legal server reports. Making it presentable in Power BI has just been so much more beneficial. That's all.
Ashley?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we've never really or at least not as far as I know, done at like an internal training on the kind of things that you've shared in the PowerPoint there. I think that the grants team that we have has been around for a long time. And so I kind of came in about a year ago, you know, working with this team that kind of I think was already pretty familiar with it. But something that does, you know, come up every once in a while is like, for example, a funder will ask for a specific data point, and they'll say to us, yeah, can you run a report and get us this number? And we'll say, you know, like, well, what do you mean by that? Or like, we don't exactly collect that per se, or like right now in particular, so we do immigration services. There's this group of folks that have been receiving services from us for the last couple of years that are loosely called like recent arrivals, but like it's kind of like this media buzzword. And so it's a lot of funders are asking about this, but there's no actual like definition of like what that is. And it's like it's a changing goalpost, right? So if you're saying recent, then what you're saying is like it's actually relevant to the current date and time. And so we're having kind of like a series of brainstorming discussions, I guess. So like first we're gonna be meeting with development to say, okay, what exactly is it that funders are looking for? And then meeting with the heads of the legal teams to say, okay, like what like in practice, like what does this actually mean? So like then our data team can meet and say, okay, well then how is this actually represented in the data? Do we actually need a new field to collect additional data? Like what does that look like? So I think for us, it's like, it's a matter of having the discussion around like, what exactly are you looking for? And then, you know, for the most part, you know, when we get requests for data, you know, it's something that we already have. We just run a report. Sometimes folks will even like send us a report, like an old report, and say, oh, hey, can you like get us this data, but for like this particular time frame or something like that, or for this program and project instead of the one that's on there. But then there are other times when, like I'm saying, like a new kind of desire for a type of data comes up that's not currently being collected or not being collected kind of in the way that funders want to hear about it. And so then that's the question of like, do we collect something new, and like what does that look like kind of in the life cycle of a case? So when are we collecting it? Like when do we actually, like when does a person even know this data, that kind of thing. So I don't know if that helps folks, but that's kind of the process we've been using.
So yeah, certainly for funders in particular, if they often don't directly ask me questions, but questions come to me from their program contact or through development. And almost always the correct first answer is not to give them a number, but to send them a variety of questions back, or statements about what your data actually describe. Where I just like there's discussion around immigrants, and I mean, we could tell that you could be a non-citizen immigrant who came here 30 years ago is going to be very different from someone who came here 6 months ago. And so trying to understand what your interest is in quote unquote immigrants, is like you don't want to tell them anything before you know what they really want.
I think that's totally right. And I think kind of going on Ashley's point, right? I think one of the things that folks in this group and in roles like this can do at their organization is help folks think through, okay, what can be collected versus what can be calculated. And so, for example, for a recent arrival, I might ask like the estimated date of arrival, right? And from that date of arrival, I can then calculate like how many days was it until you got service, how many days has it been till today's date, et cetera. Versus if you said, okay, this person arrived roughly 3 months ago, you would then need to know when that data was input to know what that, and to be able to do anything with that. And so I think that, a lot of folks on the program side would kind of say, oh, it's simpler to just get like these rough estimates and this drop down or whatever. And you as a data person could have that conversation about, does that make sense? Is that really going to get you what you need? Or do you want something that is perhaps more discreet that we can then use in a multitude of ways looking forward? I think regardless, that initial conversation seems to be super key.
So this is really interesting to me, as what I did before in local government. I actually did a lot of data stuff. I'm realizing it was all data, but I needed certain information from the sheriff's deputies on the street. So I just started showing up to roll calls and saying, hey, I'm the person in the office that reads these reports. I do read every report that you give. This is why I need, this is what I need, this is why I need it. And then to make it so that they wanted to give it to me. I mean, I had these little pins engraved. They were really cheap, but they loved being called up to the front of roll call and getting this award, for really good information. So this is not something that had ever been done before. So yeah, maybe you've never had data training at your organization, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. Um, so in a whole different kind of organization, it was very successful for me to just start showing up to meetings and find a way to help people understand why this is important, and find that little why is it important and how is it important, and it may take a sticker or a silly pen, but it can change the culture, and it can change the information that you're receiving. It is doable, but it's a user experience training, all kinds of things mixed in. But I don't want people to think that, oh, well, I can't change because this is the way we've always done it. If I can change a sheriff's department, a legal aid organization should be a piece of cake. So
That kind of goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about talking about the why. I think some of it is talking about the why of like the reporting and the grants and all this. But part of it is just basic kind of management and psychology of, let's reward people for doing data well. Let's provide them with the information they need to understand how it's, helping them and their clients to do what they're doing and collect and share that data. I think that at least for LAFLA, it was probably a few years after I started in the position that we kind of overcame the historic association of like data is bad and that is going to get me in trouble and missing data is going to get me in trouble. And so changing that association to a good thing takes a lot of time and people work, which is like Heidi has been communicating so effectively that's just so much of our work is that people in translation work.
yeah, absolutely. And if funding is secured by the data, maybe that's another set of hands to do the work if everything is completely captured, right? So, well, awesome. Well, it is 2:59. I wanted to make sure that we mentioned our upcoming meeting on August 12th. Nate and Susan are going to be talking about QGIS and GeoJSON. I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly, but you can all laugh at me. That's okay. And then on September 9th, Sarah Freymiller is going to be talking about Excel mapping and Excel tips and tricks. So that's what's coming up in the future. And just want to say thank you for coming today. And I hope that you found it helpful. We will put the recording, make it available so that if you ever do miss, we do try to have those available for you as well. Thank you so much.